right. Hey, welcome to episode 2 of In the Den, where people come first and everyone gets home safe. And we've got 3 of us this time. Johnny flew in from Texas, and we're excited to have him on here with us. And I'm your host, Jon Stanley, and this is my co-host, Jesse.
I'm Jesse Staley.
And I'm Johnny Mullins.
Nice. We're pretty excited to get another episode out and really just talk about some topics in the industry and opportunities to strengthen some education and teach. And that's what the purpose of this podcast is for us to give little nuggets of knowledge and highlights as well as recognize some people in the industry. So I want to start off with just some news and some things that we've ran into with some recent regulations and, again, some hot topics that are happening in the industry, and maybe try not to go too controversial with some of it, but just touch on it. So we want to talk about the changes of what we saw in the forms that are available on FMCSA's website, and how people who might be navigating the Spanish-speaking world with their employees. We still have to do DQ files on people who don't have CDLs, and sometimes those individuals are Spanish-speaking. So, we can talk about how we're going to navigate that and how we help.
And for anybody who's listening, what happened was the FMCSA removed all of the Spanish translated documents from their FMCSA website. So there used to be, a whole side, another section of the FMCSA website that was entirely in Spanish. And that's, is it just the documents or the whole?
I couldn't find any documents that were in Spanish.
Part of the English language enforcement.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we understand, the drive behind the Spanish speaking, and I support providing safe roads and making sure that the individuals who are driving are, able to understand. But we also can't talk about human beings and kind of remove the opportunity to convey what needs to be done on these files. And these individuals aren't CDL holders that we're dealing with that need these Spanish documents. And so, I think a way for that to be tackled and combated is to make bilingual documents. So you still have the English on the document, but we've got Spanish as well. So they know what you're asking for on these documents.
So you're suggesting one form with both English and Spanish on it. Yeah. And I think that's a good idea.
Yeah. So we're going to start creating those in our operation and for our customers. But I think we're going to see more and more of that stuff going away, and the resources that we used to rely on from FMCSA kind of change because of the climate or the,
current administration
flavor of the next 4 years. Right. Yeah.
I mean, that is right. Without getting too political, that's kind of what happens in a 2-party system.
Yeah.
Is it just, there's fluctuations every 4 years or so. So,
any updates on the medical card stuff?
I was going to look that up and I don't know. So to talk, what John's referring to is, so last June is when the way medical cards were reported to state changed. Before, you'd get your medical card, you'd go to your local DMV or motor vehicle department and turn that in, and they would put it on your motor vehicle record. And that's how, after 15 days, that paper copy was no longer valid. It was what was valid would be what was on your record. So in June of last year, they changed that to where you go get your medical card, the medical examiner then sends it to the FMCSA through, whatever portal they've created. And then the FMCSA would report it to the state. And that didn't work. It hasn't worked very smoothly yet. So, within about a month of that, they issued an extension for your med card. So your paper copy of your med card would be valid for 60 days from the date of issue. So, and that in theory, right, was to give the state and the FMCSA time to collect that data. Well, they've issued that the initial one was 3 months, and then they issued another one for 3 months. The last one expired April 10th, and I don't know if there has been another extension to that.
Yeah, I can't. It's not on their. It's not on their website. It's not on. So I don't.
But
think
interestingly
it's
enough, neither the one when they announced the one in July that would go, January that would go through April 10th, it didn't show up on the FMCSA website for quite a while. But there is a memorandum out there, or there was for that one. So we just need to search. We can figure that out. And in the comments or whatever, we can post that.
Some of the states that were initially not compliant were actually pretty good at getting in on a license. What we see is, states like Kentucky and Georgia have historically been really bad. And I think they're in that list of not compliant. But, a lot of states that they said weren't compliant were already very good at getting in on the DMV record. So they had a good process, even though it wasn't whatever the FMCSA's process was.
And the other part of this switch, the reason why has to do with forging documents. That was an element, right? Because, with Photoshop and AI and all that stuff, it became increasingly easier to create a fake document and take it in. So by, it's almost like a chain of custody for a drug test, right? There's a very specific process and that you have to go through, and it's taken out of the driver's hands to update that information with the state. So I understand why they did that. But there's just been hiccups in the process. So,
yeah. Well, I just saw something here that it looks like, and I can't link it back to the FMCSA, but there is some information saying from April 11th to October 11th.
Yeah,
you can use that paper copy.
Yeah, so somewhere out there we'll find it, and if there's comments, I can post the actual memo. I'll find it eventually, but I assume that they would extend that again because the process still isn't working very well. So yeah, when you get your med card, keep the paper copy. It's valid for 60 days beyond the issue date, and hopefully right by 60 days, it's been updated with the state and is on your record. If you're a driver, you can check your motor vehicle record throughout that period. If you're a company, maybe you wait until 50 days and then run the motor vehicle record to verify that it has been updated. In some states, you're still able to go in and turn it in person. We're in Colorado. I know in this state, they have removed that ability. You can't set an appointment. You can't do a walk-in. Online, they used to have a link where you could upload it. They don't have that link anymore. So they've removed the ability for a driver to even do that. Yeah.
Well, I think the last little piece of news that's going on in the industry is obviously the non-domiciled CDL holders, right? And so I think there's, a lot of different new regulations that states have to follow. And if they don't follow them as of March 16th of this year, it's, they're not valid CDLs. And so when you're doing your verifications now, hiring people who are here on work visas or, just make sure you've done your due diligence to ensure that's a valid issued CDL. So you don't have an issue while you're on the road and they figure out that it wasn't, and you got a stranded vehicle.
And there's services out there like E-Verify, that can help with that kind of process.
Yeah.
But
yeah. All right. Well, we'd like to move into doing some education on training. We think this is kind of an area in the industry that's very lacking. And, there's definitely some room to do a better job at training our drivers, whether you're driving smaller vehicles or you're driving larger vehicles, heavy haul. Training is extremely important. And I would even ask that we go a little bit further and go beyond drivers and also talk a little bit about training leaders in the industry as well, right? So, Johnny, this is kind of your baby in our operation, so you'll kick us off on that.
Training training is something that a lot of people miss. And really it's just because, they if they build the DQ file, they get the driver in. Well, he's got a license. He knows what to do, right? I'm going to put him in the truck, whether it's CDL or non-CDL, and off they go, right? That there's no rules around that. So the FMCSA doesn't say, hey, other than entry-level driver training for a CDL holder, you don't have to do any training. So people don't do it. And it's really important. The expectation, if you have to defend yourself with your insurance company and with a plaintiff attorney, is that you do some training. So, when you onboard somebody, you need to do some type of onboarding training. And that's typically, not just company training, but some type of safety training, defensive driver training. If you're running vehicle cameras, how does a camera work? What behaviors is this camera going to catch? When are we going to come to you about those behaviors or hold you accountable? So having some type of simple orientation where you go through some basic training, and we build one in Driver Education Network. It's got 10 courses in it, and none of them are longer than 10 minutes. So you figure you're not getting a whole bunch. You're getting some basic training before you get in the truck. And then having training later, typically you want to have monthly recurrent safety training. You can also have training, for job. If somebody's struggling their job, you can train them in, if they're a tow driver, here's how to use dollies or whatever that is, right? But you want to have something on a consistent basis. That does a couple of things. When you train them when they come on board, and when you do some type of recurrent monthly training, what you're trying to get to is, I'm giving this driver the tools that he needs to be a good driver, right? And when you hire a CDL driver, the perception is, well, I hired a professional driver. And we all know that's not always true. Might have a CDL doesn't mean they're professional, right? Or they drive professional.
You hired the behaviors from the last company that they allowed, right? Yeah.
And I mean, depending on how long they had their CDL, their neighbor might have gave them the test, right?
Right.
So you want to get, you need to be able to say, I trained them. And when you have an accident, if it's your driver's fault, you want to be able to say it's an accident. The definition of an accident is he made a mistake. You don't want to be negligent. So doing that training protects you, protects the driver, and makes them human, makes them just a person who made a mistake. The reality is they're driving, 10 to 20 times, sometimes 50 times what an average driver drives, right? They're driving all the time. So their chance, if you just look at statistics of having an accident, are tremendously higher than a regular driver on the road. Now they're better drivers, so they have a lot less accidents, but still they're in a situation where they can have an accident. And everybody knows if you have an accident in a commercial vehicle, you are guilty until proven innocent. I mean, you can be parked and somebody can rear end you, and you're going to defend yourself in court typically. So being able to say, hey, look, I did everything I could do for this driver. I did some training when I brought him in. I did more than the industry asks for, right? I trained them monthly in safety training, and then doing some type of recurrent training. When you have a behavior with the camera or you have an accident, doing some type of retraining. And that retraining can be as simple as like one of our courses at 10 minutes, or having another driver go do a ride along with them and observe them. It can be some, hey, if it's backing, going out in the yard and doing some backing training with them, or walking around the truck and talking about, knowing where everything's at on your truck, right? So just having some follow-up training when something happens, that you think about when a driver has an accident. If you have a driver have an accident, whether it's his fault or not, or her fault, when you have some type of training after that, as thorough or as brief as it is, if they have another incident later, you're able to say, look, I addressed it. A lot of people think, well, a driver has an accident, damaging my vehicle, I'm going to write him up. And that's good. Corrective action is good. But in that corrective action, what did you do if you're going to keep that driver driving your vehicle to give them the skills to not have that situation again? And I'm a big fan, and not everybody is, but I'm a big fan of, if it's not their fault, still giving them some training.
Yeah.
Because in my career managing drivers, we would have a driver have an accident, and then they would have another accident, sometimes 2 or 3 accidents in a 4-week period. And really what happens is they have that accident, especially the really good drivers who don't have accidents. When they do have an accident, they're wound up. Like they're upset about it, right? So, and then when they have the next accident, it's really because they're just kind of out of their element, right? Yeah. So having that training, having some type of safety training, however you do it, if you bring them in and have them watch a video, if you send them something electronic like we do, just having some simple training to kind of get their mind back straight. Hey, you're okay. Let's get you thinking about safety. Let's get you thinking about operating the vehicle safe.
Well, and I think the thing that's kind of missed in the industry is that we're too quick to blame, right? And part of that is because we're being blamed as an industry, mm-hmm. right? And so our reaction to that is to automatically go blame our driver for making a decision, or And that's where discipline comes into play, I think, is if you go straight to discipline and you never do anything to develop or strengthen your driver in the first place, you've just blamed them for why the behavior existed rather than trying to figure out, here are the tools to fix the behavior, right? And so too many times we go on site and do a deep dive with a carrier, and they're, you ask them, do you have remedial training? And their response is, well, yeah, we bring them in and we coach them, right? Yeah, but what tools did you give them, right? Did you give them anything else to reuse down the road, right? And we have so many stories after story after story in our education and our operation where we've taught drivers, run your play differently, right? Do this differently, and here's the outcome. And we watch them grow and really change their behaviors to where we're not having accidents, we're not having near misses, right?
Well, it's giving them the tools to fix that behavior, right? You can write them up for rear-ended somebody, but if you don't give them any tools to not rear-end somebody, hey, I'm going to teach you about following distance. I'm going to teach you how to not be in that situation, or how to be in a better position when something like that happens, right? And so it's going back and mitigating that, right? And doing something for that driver. I mean, it's so easy to blame the driver, but and kind of one of the funny things people miss in training is a lot of our customers are going to, I'm overwhelmed. I got all these guys doing dumb stuff. And when I manage drivers, and I think when all of us manage drivers, you get overwhelmed by guys doing stuff they shouldn't do. Like, you're like, this driver's, I don't know why you did that. Well, if you train drivers when they come in, and you think about, a lot of our customers struggle with roadside inspections, right? So when you hire that driver in orientation, do you go through a pre-trip? Yeah, they should know how to pre-trip if they got a CDL, right? They should know that. But did you go through it? And during that training, did you have a talk about what your expectations are? Yeah. So we do a lot of tow customers, for example. And I know with them, one of the things we always talk about is having that driver inspect the truck for the tools they need on scene. So he doesn't show up without what he needs to do his job, right? And that could be true in tanker, that could be true in, multiple jobs, right? So giving them those tools, I know when I managed drivers and I first put training in, and Mark DeAndre, who's one of our employees, was kind of the guy that got me on that. We started doing training when they came in the door, and we started doing monthly training, and a lot of the noise went away. We didn't have to solve so many problems. They knew the expectation. We gave them the skills not to have that situation. Now, some of them still did, but I would tell you it was 20%. 80% of that stuff went away because they knew what to do, and it wasn't hard. And I would tell you, like, orientation, a standard orientation, 3 hours at the most. Yeah. But it's that getting them in, right? Yep. You have companies that are bigger and you might have a lot going on. And, if like these oil field companies, some of them do a week or 2 weeks, and that's great because they have that much information to give them. But if you got a regular driver, especially like we do with a lot of non-CDL drivers, if you're going to put a guy in a van or a pickup truck, you don't have to have a really long training, but you need some basic training. And I would tell you, if you're hiring somebody that's under 40, they've been texting and holding their phone in their hand since they were 16. So that's a behavior you're going to have to train out of them. Yeah. You can't, when cameras first came out, the attitude was, I'm going to threaten the driver. They pick up their camera, I'm going to fire him, right? Well, we always tell our customers, if you do that, you're going to be here alone. Yeah. So you really have to step back and go, I'm going to have to teach this person to be a good driver. I hired them. I thought they were a good hire. Now I need to give them the skills that I expect in my vehicle, or that I need for my insurance, right? For what I want to achieve. So you're just really doing yourself a disservice when you bring them in and go, hey, there's the vehicle, good luck. And then you're surprised when you get bad results.
Yeah. So I want to talk about, kind of the one and done situation. John and I earlier in our careers worked together at a Fortune 500 company. And for cell phones, that was the policy. If they had the phone in their hand, we had to let someone go because the phone was on their lap, it slid off and he touched it.
And we were short staffed.
Yeah. And we let him go. And the bad thing about that is that driver goes somewhere else and does the exact same behavior. Now with the phone and grabbing the lap, but that's not a big deal, right? But the guy who's texting while driving down the road, it's dangerous behavior. If we don't change that person, they're going to do that behavior somewhere else, and they're going to still be a danger on the road for everybody. Yeah. And so I think one of the big things about what we do and what we teach is just that exact principle. You've hired this person, you invested in them, you've put the time into them. Let's not just run straight to discipline, or you do this again that you're fired. Let's coach and train. Let's make a better driver, because then you change someone's life forever, and potentially you're saving someone's life if there's a potential, some future accident.
The other thing you hit on is when you hire a driver, they come in, they're experienced. Why are they applying to you?
Mm-hmm.
They're going to tell you they're applying to you because, I want to work here. I heard it's a great place to work. They might have left their last job because they were driving around with their phone in their hand, or they ran into a bunch of people. They had a bunch of accidents, right?
Yeah.
I ran into that recently with a customer where I actually hooked 2 of the customers up because he had worked for one of our other customers previously, and they talked, right? Turned out the guy had left on his own and done something else, right? But he wanted to know, but that driver could have left his last job because he wasn't a good driver, because he had accidents. And that doesn't always show up on PSP or on their MVR. You're not always going to see that when you research that driver. They're obviously not going to, really rarely going to tell you that in an interview, right?
Yeah.
They're going to sell you on them. So, when you get them in, you just have to understand, I got to teach what I want, what I need. I can't afford accidents, so I'm going to have to teach that, or I can't afford. And really, when you think about training, it is safety training, but there's a lot of safety that's not driving, depending on what your job is. If you're doing construction, if you're doing towing, if you're doing whatever, hauling certain stuff, strapping, unloading stuff. So you got to do the training based on the job. So you really almost have to look at your operation and go, what have been my injuries? What have been my accidents? And start asking yourself what's going on. We recently had some customers that were having a lot of, for lack of a better term, close quarter accidents. They were hitting cars, changing lanes because they were losing them under the hood in like a big Peterbilt, right? They were just forgetting stuff was there. They were hitting stuff near them. So then you go, okay, we need to have some space management, right? And not necessarily following distance is space management, but knowing what's around your truck.
Yeah, like spatial awareness.
Yeah, spatial awareness, right?
Yeah.
And we had a drive. We went and spent time with the driver in the truck of, hey, let's watch your space, right? That driver, ironically, had 1 accident that was his fault and 2 that weren't. But the 2 that weren't were clearly avoidable. Had he been managing the space around his truck, the person who did the dumb stuff wouldn't have affected him, right? They wouldn't have hit him. They might have hit somebody else, but and ultimately they defended themselves in one of those 2 accidents. So even though you're not at fault, and maybe your insurance company isn't paying out, you're spending a bunch of time dealing with it. So being able to have your driver do the right thing and stay out of that, the expectation is other drivers do dumb stuff. So you got to give your driver the skills to anticipate people doing dumb stuff and to be in a position to not get in a wreck when somebody does.
Yeah. I mean, look, we're human, right? And we're all designed to err, right? I mean, and I think that's the opportunity that we have here is your training program is really there to help your drivers overcome the error, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or help prevent future errors. And, episode 1 here, we talked about driver qualification files and what goes into it and how to qualify your drivers on paper. Your training program is really what helps you continue to qualify your driver in action, right? And then the component of it is you need to document it, right? We go into a lot of places where we train. Oh yeah, we train. And our favorite line is show me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't show us, it doesn't exist, because when you go to court, and notice I said when and not if, right?
Absolutely.
When you go to court, the first thing they pull is your DQ file to see how you qualified them on paper. And the second thing they pull is how did you train them, right?
Yeah, what documentation, exists that showed that you did, something to make this person a safe driver on the road.
Yeah.
So.
And your insurance company, they want to see this. This is when I was doing insurance audits and doing risk management reviews. If you didn't have a training program, that was the very first recommendation I made, right? And it was always a critical recommendation, because from an underwriting standpoint, that is the proof that you're engaged in the safety program, is having that training, right? And it's because those plaintiff attorneys, that's the first thing they select, right? And if you can't prove that you're engaged with the safety program, I can't prove that you actually have a safety program, right? So you want to start pleasing your insurance company as much as everybody hates them in the industry. It's you have to have it. You can't operate without it. It might be time to conform to what they're looking for if you want to start seeing those premium rates not jump up 30% every year.
Well,
right.
And it changes the claim, right? You might be at fault. I mean, we went through a lawsuit. It was a couple of years ago with one of our customers. They were technically at fault, right? The other person had some fault, but once they figured out, hey, this driver has a good DQ file, this driver has done their training consistently,
faithfully,
right?
Yeah.
And, they had cameras and the driver had been coached on some behaviors. So able to go back and say, hey, you know what, he's human. And they ended up having some expense, but their expense was what's fair. They paid some lost wages and some medical bills. They didn't pay punitive damages because they were the big bad company, right?
Yeah.
So able to go in and just say, look, it's just an accident. And we're going to do what's fit. We're going to do what's right. And we're going to move on. And, that difference is a digit on that settlement.
Yeah.
It is it's from 6 figures to 7 figures, or from, 5 figures to 6 figures. It always adds another number. So having that stuff in line is big. And I think the other thing people miss out a lot on training is when you hire a driver and you bring them in and you don't train them, you're not a real job. Now I'm just working at Subway till I find another job, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's how they view it. When they come in and you do some training and you set the expectation, and if you have onboarding training and then you have some type of, recurrent training, now they're in a professional job. Now this is a career, because one of the challenges, no matter what they're driving, is to get them to understand this is a career. Most of the drivers we see are making really good money. Even if they're driving a non-CDL vehicle, they're making $60,000 to $150,000 a year, some higher. And you get these younger, especially the younger drivers, they're like, yeah, I'm here till the big job comes, right? That is the big job.
Yeah.
The people you went to school with are making, 20,000 and they're living in their parents' basement.
Yeah.
You're driving a truck or a pickup truck or whatever you're doing. You have a job that's actually a career. If you're in construction, if you're doing concrete or you're doing towing, they make a lot of money. And more, they're making more money than college graduates. People are graduating college and they're like, yeah, you can graduate college and make $40,000 a year. And they're like, wait, I'm driving a truck, or I'm doing plumbing or whatever I'm doing, right?
With $120,000 in debt, right? Yeah.
Well, and they're like, I'm already making 4 times that.
Yeah.
So,
well, we got to make it cool again, right? And I think training is an opportunity to teach them you can be more than just a driver, right? You are more than just a driver in this operation. And you're starting to humanize, like you mentioned earlier, when we train and we train good with effective training, you're humanizing your program. You're making them aware that I see you and I'm going to treat you with dignity. I'm going to give you education. The CDL is the only professional license that I'm aware of that doesn't require continuing education.
True.
Shame on us as an industry, right? Lawyers have to do it. Nurses, doctors, everybody has to take continuing education to maintain their license, but we don't have to have continuing education to maintain the CDL. So start treating your drivers like the professionals that they are. They are no different than a doctor.
Well, setting an expectation is really good, right?
Yeah.
You think about in any professional sport, and if you're from Cleveland, I apologize, but I'm a Broncos fan, but I always look at it and go, you want to play for the team that's going to the Super Bowl. You don't want to play for the Browns, right? If you're a football player. Now, maybe that'll change for them, but still, it's that expectation, right? It's, I'm going to have certain expectations of you. And those teams that win in any sport, football, basketball, whatever, though they have expectations, they have accountability, and they probably have very good practices, right? They practice skills, they train skills, they develop players very well. You always hear that, like these, the Super Bowl team, for example, always has players that they drafted that were in the 7th round that got developed that are, an all-star, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't happen on the teams that don't win because they don't put that focus in. And I know when we go into companies, I meet so many drivers that, they took that job because their neighbor worked there, or somebody told them to work there. And then that company invested in them and they're one of their best employees, and that's their career. And, I always think back to when I got my CDL, I was super proud. I told everybody I'm still proud to this day that I did. So, and I always felt like I'm a professional driver. I'm a better driver than everybody on the road because the company I worked for at the time, they taught me that. That was their expectation, right? They gave me a lot of training. They focused on that. And so you came out of there going, I'm proud of what I do. So I think that training, that onboarding training, that recurrent training, just having that focus on getting them trained, subconsciously it says, I care about you. If you don't focus on it and you say, I really care about you as an employee, I pay you well. It doesn't mean you care about them, right? When I manage, one of the things I used to always tell people is, health benefits matter to people. That's how they view you subconsciously. The bathroom, being hammered was one of the things I used to always tell everybody. If your bathroom's terrible and you tell your employees, oh, I really care about you. And they go in there and they're like, well, I'm gonna go to the gas station. It's cleaner. Right.
Yeah.
So
the truck stops cleaner. Yeah.
Yeah. So
it's terrible.
So having that, it's the same thing with, I'm going to onboard you, right? And you think about DQ file, I'm going to make you do these things when you come in. I need to verify who you are. And then I want to help you be better. I want to help you be safe. And I mean, you're going to get drivers that push back on training. And what I always did and what I tell our customers is, you don't want them to have to defend themselves because, we know plaintiff attorney sues you as a company, they typically serve your driver as well. So, we dealt with this. We had a driver who said, they served him in front of his family and he was thoroughly embarrassed. And after they left, he told his wife, we can't put our daughter through college. And I remember being stunned when he told us that, that was what he thought. He genuinely believed that's it. We're broke for life, and it didn't turn out that way. The company had a good program. He had been trained and everything turned out fine. But ultimately that's what they're facing. Right. In a lot of states, you have to sue the driver to get to the company. So, when you're telling a driver, hey, I want to train you. Hey, I don't want you to be in this situation. You also have to think about what are they going to deal with if they kill somebody?
Yeah.
Are they going to be able to do that job anymore?
Yeah.
And what else is it going to affect in their life? Like I can't imagine sitting home going, hey, I was doing something stupid and I ran into somebody, or I wasn't trained and I killed somebody, or what if they kill themselves?
Yeah.
You want to look their wife in the face or their spouse in the face and say, I didn't do what I should have done.
Sorry, I didn't give the tools to your loved one to make sure they got home safe every day. Right.
Yeah.
And that's what it comes down to, right? We're stewards of human beings. Whether you decide to take that role on or not, when you decide to become a leader or a business owner that has employees, in my opinion, you decided to be a steward of human beings. And if you're going to do that, you have to give them the tools to be successful. Training is the best way to do it. Right. So
it doesn't have to be a big deal either. It can be basic. I mean, start with something, it doesn't, you think about it. People always think, well, these big companies who have week-long courses and week-long onboarding, you don't have to have that.
Yeah.
But have something.
I would argue that, depending on the company, that sometimes that week-long training it's almost useless. I mean, you mentioned three hours, right, for onboarding. Again, referencing back to, when I was working in a Fortune 500 company, it was 2 days worth of training for the drivers. They would plop them in front of a computer and leave the room. And I remember, I'd walk by the room and the driver would be on their phone as the video is playing. Like they weren't engaged in any way.
Yeah.
So your orientation, I kind of want to talk about orientation and expectations. You've mentioned expectations a lot. That's your opportunity, right? To tell the driver what you need from them professionally. This is what it means to work at ABC company. And this is what we're going to hold you accountable for in the future. These are the expectations for safety. These are the expectations for, time off requests, whatever you want to put in that orientation. It should obviously include safety information because driving is, a high risk situation that also carries high dollar amounts when there's penalties or lawyers. But, you're setting the expectation, but you're also like, you both mentioned this, that, you're telling the driver, like, this is a professional, you're elite now. So you're teaching them kind of what to expect from you too, that you view them, as something more than just a person filling a seat, someone who's got, who can fog up a mirror, so to speak.
Well, you came here to work for somebody who's going to be great.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to, somebody asks you, how's your job? You don't say, oh, we suck. You're going to say, hey, we're good at what we do, right? I'm good at what I do. Self-pride is a big deal. So you're giving us some self-pride. And it's kind of funny when you mention how you set up orientation. We always tell everybody, that a lot of people think orientation is kind of the HR paperwork, right? Benefits and signing your W-4 and all that type of stuff, right? I-9s. That should be 10% or less of your onboarding. Everything else should be safety and job-based. And it can be, hey, here's how you log into the ELD if they're using an ELD, or here's how you fill out your timesheet, or those types of things, right? You want all those things in there. You want to answer those questions. But, I say when you get to safety training, you can use a service like us. There's a bunch of other services out there that you can use. You want to keep that brief. If you're teaching them a skill, giving them 4 hours of distracted driving training, they're going to get about 15 minutes to 30 minutes of training out of that. They got a short attention span. So keeping some of those topics brief, and then having somebody they're going to train with, having your trainer trained and work with them. And I would say, if you don't want to go out and buy something, you could have your driver come in and teach. You got drivers who are good at skills. If you got a driver who's really good at backing and you want to have that driver, hey, on Monday, you're going to come by and teach the new drivers backing. You're going to work with them on backing, right?
Yeah.
Because they might not have the skills that 20-year employee you has, or whatever it is. If you're pulling a gooseneck and somebody's, never getting any violations pulling that gooseneck, okay, well, they might want to do pre-trip training with your new drivers.
Yeah. Well, I want to touch on this when we talk about orientation. If you look up the definition of orientation, right? The definition of orientation is the act of aligning, positioning, or familiarizing oneself with a new environment, direction, or set of principles. If all you're doing is HR paperwork, that's not a new set of principles, right? So you don't have an orientation program. You are not aligning them with your new environment, right? And your environment is different than any other environment they've ever been in. And if you don't align them to it, they're not going to fit in your environment. It's like taking a new fish you bought from the fish store and throwing them in a tank of water you haven't acclimated it to, right? You're going to kill them off. And that is exactly what orientation does. Orientation aligns them to your new set of principles. And what I like to teach as well is orientation. Yes, you might have a 3-hour orientation, but really your orientation program should be 90 days long, because you're taking every opportunity to reconnect and reconnect and reconnect. Because if you think they listen to you in those 3 hours, you're wrong. They listen to you for the first 20 minutes, and the other information you gave them, they don't remember. So take that first 20 minutes and touch on the most important things you want them to take away for the next 2 or 3 weeks before you can meet with them again, right?
Well, an orientation should always include culture.
Yeah.
If most of these companies, most of your companies, they have some type of culture, right? They've been around 100 years, they've been around 50 years, they were started this way, or here's how we do things, right?
Yeah.
So you're kind of getting them in, you're pulling them into the family, right? So you want to sell some of your culture. And then I think you're dead right. It's following up at 30 days, following up at 60 days, following up at 90 days. I'm a big fan of that. And it doesn't have to be really structured. It's just having a conversation about, hey, what do you need my help with?
Yeah.
And then let me give you some observations of what I've seen, because you've had these issues, right? You may coach them on a couple things.
Yeah.
And that, for me, that's a cup of coffee. It might be, it might be lunch if you want to, it's just meeting back with them. It's funny when I first did that, I asked, well, how was your trainer? Right. First driver ever did that too. How was your training? He had one of my best drivers as first trainer. And, he tells me, well, I didn't train with that guy. So what do you mean? Like, I thought he trained with that guy for a week or 2 weeks, I think it was. And, he said, no, we got in a fight the first day and he kicked me out of the truck on the side of the road. I was like, what? And he said, yeah, he kicked me out of the truck. I said, what did you do? He said, well, I walked to a 7-Eleven and called my wife to pick me up. And he said, but then this other guy, Pedro, came by, saw me, he picked me up. So I trained with Pedro for 2 weeks. And I was like, oh, wow. Like, I had no idea. Right. And what I learned from that was the guy who was a trainer was a fantastic driver. He was a terrible trainer.
Yeah.
He was productive. He didn't want to spend time to teach. I kind of got an education from that, but you might find out, hey, this trainer's better than that trainer, or this trainer's better at teaching this skill than this trainer is. And you'll adjust what you do, and you might adjust who you put that driver with, because you hire that driver and you go, okay, they're good at this, but they're not going to be good at this. So I know this guy's going to be or girl's going to be the best trainer. Right. Yeah. So I'm going to put them over here to train with this person because they're going to get the skills they need. And you might find out, hey, I didn't tell you something. And I think we've all been in a job where somebody, called you in and chewed you out for something. Why aren't you doing this? And you're like, well, because nobody told me. Yeah. I would have done it if you'd have told me to do it. I just had no idea. So you're going to miss stuff. And that follow-up is good, following up, talking to them, weekly really for the first 30 days, and then kind of having a review at the end of 30 days, but 60 days and 90 days. And 90 days is, hey, congratulations. Because if you get them 90 days, they typically stay 3 to 4 years. Yeah. So you're trying to keep them. You're trying not to keep hiring. And that investment makes a difference. That's your chance to find out if they're having an issue, because, they might get frustrated with you didn't teach them something, and then they quit. And you're like, I don't understand why they quit. Yeah. Well, they quit because they think you're crazy, and somebody's getting on them for something they were never told or never taught. And you had that opportunity to cure that. So
I want to talk about another element too. that we really haven't addressed is documentation, right? So documentation of your training program, whether that's recurring training monthly through videos or stand-up talks, toolbox talks, or if it's remedial, especially orientation too, right? Documenting what you're talking about is very critical to the whole process. And, so having a game plan, knowing what you're going to talk about in orientation, having that written down so that it's the same for every driver. Because if you don't have that playbook to go off of, what happens? Different drivers know different things.
Inconsistency.
Right.
Yeah.
So so it helps with that consistency during orientation. And then further down the road, and we've seen this multiple times, is that litigation. When you're involved in a lawsuit, if you don't have something that shows proof positive that this driver received this training, it doesn't happen. It didn't happen in a court of law.
Yeah. And hey, I'll just throw this out there. If you're struggling with training and you need help getting it dialed in and aligned, and finding new creative ways to get your drivers engaged, we want to hear from you. And this is what we live for, right? For the sake of time, I want to move on to just a little bit of, maybe 5 minutes here of talking about leadership training. And, we spend a lot of time focusing on drivers and teaching drivers, but your frontline supervisors, that you moved up from being a driver to now being your safety manager or to being your frontline supervisor, really only knew how to be a driver. And if you're not investing in training to make them better, the result is going to be detrimental as well, right? And one of the things I appreciate the most in my career is, I used to work for Johnny at a very large company, and Johnny invested in training his people and developing us as leaders and getting us one-on-one help with business coaches and people to teach us how to have effective communication and how to manage our time and how to manage critical conversations. And I'm a way better leader because of that training. And it took effort on my part to want to apply those things that I was learning. But if I never received that opportunity, I don't know if I would have learned this stuff, right? Which then propelled me to expand my career in various directions. And I think you can't have the mentality that I don't want to make my leaders better at fear they're going to go somewhere different, right? What a legacy you can build and design by making your leaders better today. But find opportunities to strengthen them and to stretch them and to let them grow. They're going to leave you if they want to leave you anyways, right? So why not leave making the industry better?
Right.
In my opinion.
You're talking about career development, right?
Yeah.
And when you give that gift as a owner of a company or upper management, when you're promoting, because let's be honest, in the transportation world, most of us moved up from driver into management.
Yeah.
So when you take the opportunity to invest in that individual and help make them a better leader, again, you're changing someone for life. And having that abundance mentality and viewing it in that regard, like, yes, I am building this person, and if they choose to leave, that means they're growing, and I can say I had a little part in that.
Yeah.
And to watch someone, have that kind of having that mentality of watching someone grow and flourish and even outgrow you is pretty powerful and incredible. And I think we've all had that experience. And there's a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of great leadership and management books. There's programs online. We do like a TOE. We call it, this year it's the TOE Summit, where we
Survive and Thrive.
2-day course on leadership training. And so those kinds of events are, they're powerful, but they also build that sense of loyalty, and you're showing individuals like, I'm invested in you. I care about you.
Yeah.
Well, and if you don't have it internally, you can find it externally. Every new supervisor, you promote somebody who's really productive in the job, right? They've done a great job. And the challenges they have when they first become a supervisor is the other people don't do it like them. I wouldn't have done that. I don't understand why you're doing that, right? They got promoted because they didn't do that, or you got promoted because they did it right. And so, you got to teach them that, hey, how to have that conversation, how to manage somebody who's not doing what you would do, right? They typically don't have time management skills. They've always been the person when especially if they were doing some type of job out in the field driving, right? They solved problems that you never saw. That's one of the big things about any of those jobs. They take care of a lot of stuff that you don't have to get involved in. And then you make them a supervisor, and they end up not being a good supervisor if you don't train them, because they take everything. I'll do that. Let me do that. They don't know how to coach people up to do it, right? Because they're just doing what they did in the last job. So giving them some of those skills is really good, and really looking at what's out there. I mean, when I managed and I trained my supervisors, they got they got some standard stuff that I tried to teach them, but there was also some different stuff based on who they were. You might have somebody who's afraid to talk to people or afraid to hold people accountable. So you might say, all right, I'm going to look around for some training on assertiveness, right? Or you might have somebody that's a bull in a china shop that you go, I got to work on them on how to talk to people, because everybody they talk to wants to fight them, right? So you just got to look at that person's personality and go, what do I need to give them? Because you made the investment to promote them. And if you don't spend any time on them, 98% of them or 95% of them are going to fail, and then you're going to have to get rid of them. So you took an employee who did a great job, probably been with you 5+ years, right? And you promoted them. And then, I saw this a lot, with companies I went into. They were firing somebody that they promoted. And I'm like, wait, they were a great employee. They've been a supervisor for 6 months or a year, and now you're firing them. So either A, you chose them wrong, or B, you didn't train them. Usually it's B. So I think that's really important.
Yeah.
And if you think about, if you're the person picking those leaders, that makes your life so much easier. They take care of so much, and good leaders don't let you fail.
Yeah.
I used to use the analogy of, I'm driving down the road and there's a bunch of potholes and I'm heading straight for them, and they just fill them before I get there. Or, in my office, it sounded like a really good idea, but it wasn't. And so they took it out to the field and they changed it, and it worked. And, there were several times I would figure out what the supervisor was doing, and I'd go, that's not going to work. And then it worked.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, what you wanted to do wouldn't work. Well, that's okay. I got the result, right? That's all I cared about. So, you're kind of empowering them. And we go into these companies where a lot of times it's a family member who's going to move up. Well, that's great. I'm totally for that. And that's how it works. But you're doing them a disservice if you don't get them the training to move up, and maybe you didn't. Maybe you got this from your parent and they weren't a great leader, but you've done great. You've grown this business. You've done all these things. Don't put them in a bad situation to shrink the business. I had a close friend who, he took over his father's company, really big company. Well, he went to his father and said, hey, I want to work in the company. And he did a couple things. He made him work different jobs, but he put him through leadership training. He said, you're not going to get promoted if you can't lead. And, he's personality wise, he's got a pretty good personality for leadership, but he went through all that. And that company's about 4 times the size it was when his dad ran it. Right. So you're investing, that's part of, especially if it's your child, right? You want to give them the skills to do better than you. Everybody wants their child to do better than you. You should almost look at any supervisor you hire as that. When I brought supervisors in, I used to say, if I do a really good job and there isn't a place for them to grow, they're going to go somewhere else. But if I'm doing that, I've done a good job. And I have friends all over the industry because of that, because I always focused on that. And when I wanted to move up, the question always was, well, who's going to take your place?
Yeah.
Do you have somebody on the bench that you've trained?
Yep.
If you don't, a lot of times they won't promote you. So, if you're in a company that's like that, or a bigger company, that's how it works. And in smaller companies, it drives revenue. Having good supervisors means you don't waste money. You don't have a lot of mistakes. So getting people trained really, really matters.
Yeah. Look, you guys can tell that we're pretty passionate about this and developing people and developing, the human beings that you have been entrusted to be stewards of. We could talk about this for another 3 hours probably, because of how much we're involved in that.
Experience in it.
Do have a lot of experience in it. And, if you've got some struggles that you're trying to get through and you don't know how to overcome them in your training program or developing the individuals in your operation, again, we want to hear from you. We're going to end our podcast here. We announced in episode 1 that, we want to recognize some drivers in the industry. And we quickly realized when we asked for that request for people to submit drivers to us that we didn't make it very easy. It was hard to post that link. So we've actually built a website specific for this podcast where you can go nominate a driver for Driver of the Month with us. And a little recap of what that is we're going to take nominations from anybody across the country who feels like they have a driver they want to recognize. And you simply fill out this form and give us some details of who they are and why you want to nominate them. And internally within our operation, we are going to choose one driver a month from those nominations to recognize. And if they're selected, we'll highlight them on this podcast, and we'll send them a $250 Visa gift card, as well as a personalized plaque recognizing them for their efforts in the industry. So we didn't get any nominations from the last podcast episode, but we realized it's because it was really hard. A lot of people asked us, I can't find the link. I don't know where to do this at. So please, if you're listening to this, if you do anything else, even if you skip to the end of this video and find the information for this nomination, go to denpodcast.com and nominate a driver. We want to recognize these good men and women in the industry for their efforts of, getting everybody home safe. So
denpodcast.com.
Yep.
Right.
Pretty simple. denpodcast.com.
Okay.
And at the very top right corner, it says nominated driver. We also have our episodes on here. Any video that we've ever created and put on our YouTube channel will actually show up on the website as well. So, look, we're excited to continue to do this. This will be a monthly thing that we do, and we want to grow. We're looking for guests. So if you want to be on this podcast as a guest, please let us know as well. You can reach out to us. Our contact information is on our website at synergysafetygroup.com. You can go to drivereducationnetwork.com, or you can also go to Otralis.com. Those are 3 places you can go find our contact info. So, and we'll try to get some contact stuff put up on the Den Podcast website as well. So, thank you for being here. And any final words, guys?
I think, I think the most important thing to remember is get home safe.
Yeah. Get home safe. People come first.
I would say, we talked a lot about training. It's kind of like exercising. Just start doing something.
Yeah.
You don't got to do everything. People tell you when you get exercise, just start going for a walk every day. So find somewhere to start.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, thanks for being here. We'll see you guys on the next episode, and go nominate some drivers. Have a good one.
Thank you.